Paul wrote a letter to a minister named Titus as Paul was going along his missionary journey. He went through Crete and he left Titus there in order to help the church to grow and to mature. And in his words, it's to set things in order so perhaps they could be more structured and organized so that they could grow. First chapter deals perhaps even with people that were teaching false doctrines in the church. And so a false doctrine is not a difference of opinion on some, idea, but it's something that's to do with the very core elementary basic principles and doctrine of Christ. So a lot of times it was adding to the grace of Christ, or it was a change from what the apostles were teaching. So there was some struggle going on there with false teachers and perhaps even with leadership, because oftentimes a false teacher would appoint himself, or he may be appointed by the church as some kind of a leader, and so he would have an opportunity to teach false things. And so here Paul is writing to Titus, and by the time we get to chapter 2, he's talking about how teaching can happen. And kind of through our Wednesday night Bible class, and then just recently starting a Sunday morning Bible class that has to do with, learning how to be better communicators and better teachers. Then some people wonder, well, is there any place in the church for women to teach? And it's kind of like I was saying this morning, there's a lot of opportunities in the church for the women to teach. The problem is when we say in church, you're thinking right now worship service, and that's not in church. Church has to do with the body, the family, everyday opportunities with teaching. And so, even in our Bible class program, women teach. Sometimes women have an opportunity to share what they think in a Bible class, but also there's many other opportunities for women to teach. And that's what Paul instructs Titus, that he then would be the teacher and to help encourage, teach young men to do some things, and some older men, some younger women, and some older women. And so that's kind of where we are in Titus chapter 2. And so it has to do with what's called teaching others. So we always look for opportunities where we can teach, because, teaching, we're really always teaching people. Sometimes we teach people by the things we don't say. Sometimes we just teach people by our example. Sometimes we teach people by the mistakes that we make, and we can either teach them, even through mistakes, we can teach them how to do things right. In other words, that's when we would confess our mistake, either to another person, like a brother or sister of Christ, or somebody else who witnessed the mistake, or it may even be a parent having to talk to their children and say, I did wrong here, or I sinned here, or I said something I shouldn't here, or I made a promise to you I can't fulfill here, or I did say that you could go out and do that thing, but as it turns out, I kind of had a change of mind based on additional information I got that, I don't think you should be going out, that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of things that maybe we have to correct even ourselves in the presence of others. So that's a way of teaching. So there's a lot of different ways that we teach throughout the week in our example. Again, it could be at work, it could be at school, it could be at home, it could be in the neighborhood, it could be on the sports field, it could be with just friends, it could be with other Christians. So anytime we're with anybody else, we're in a way teaching, even with your own kids or your grandkids, anybody you're around, especially people that are kind of looking up to you. Maybe it's just somebody at work that they know you're a Christian, or somebody in the neighborhood, and so they're kind of looking at you saying, what does a Christian look like? How does a Christian act? How does a Christian behave? And so obviously if you mess up a lot, then they may be thinking, well, that just doesn't seem to be what a Christian would be doing. So you can say, well, you're not supposed to judge me, but they are kind of judging you based on what you do. So your character and your influence and your reputation and your example speaks a lot to other people. Sometimes even with parents trying to teach their children, and I don't know if parents still say this or not, but the old saying when we were growing up, do as I say, not as I do, right? So a parent may even say that it's wrong to do this. Well, Mommy, why do you do that? Or Daddy, how come you do that? Well, it's just not right. It's not right for you to do it. Maybe it's okay for me to do it. So just do what I say, not as I do. Well, that's kind of a little bit hypocritical, trying to be able to teach somebody something that's wrong, but I'm doing it, but you shouldn't do it. And so, again, that's a confusing message. So this is what Paul is trying to cover here as he's writing to his friend and this person that he has taught. It seems to be that Paul actually brought Timothy to a saving knowledge of the truth and taught him the gospel, and that's how he became a Christian, kind of in a similar way that he trained Titus and trained Timothy as well. Both of them were kind of his people that were working under him, and perhaps he would call them both his children or his sons in the faith, and that he was like a father to them. So that's kind of where we are. So this is what he says there in Titus chapter 2, and I thank Tom for reading that. We're going to cover mostly just the verses that he read. So this is kind of what we're looking at today about the church growing, and it has to do with teaching. And so this is what Titus was to do, first of all, as the minister. He says, you teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. Okay, so even in church, there's a lot of things that someone could teach. And we would all say some things are perhaps more important than others. But certainly to get the church grounded in the fundamentals, the things that are of first importance, the things that are necessary even for salvation. Perhaps we can talk about, other customs or habits or opinions. Maybe there's time and place for that. But right now he's saying if you teach sound doctrine so people can get a firm grasp on what the truth is, and hopefully that will silence false teachers. And so that was something that they were really struggling with in the church. So this is what he's calling Titus to do. How is he going to do that? How is he going to influence other people? An interesting verse that seems to come up, and I hear it a lot in the church, and I hear it, even from denominational people. This verse in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15, and when I hear it, it just seems to be the more I hear it, the more I think about what was the practical application when Peter wrote this, okay? So in your hearts, revere Christ, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope that you have, all right? So be prepared to give an answer for the reason for the hope that you have. That's something we should do. So I'm trying to figure out what this really means. Because people are like, if you're a Christian, you have to have the answer for any question that anyone could ever ask you on any day about anything. And so you have to have everything. You have to know it all. Anybody here know it all? Got all the, So we don't have that. But look what he's saying. You have to give a reason for the hope you have. Not saying you have to be able to, talk about light years and star distance and the age of the earth. And, if you want to study that, that's fine. But don't pull up this verse to say you've got to know everything. You just have to know about your hope. I want to know about your hope. What do you hope in? Well, I have hope in Jesus Christ. Well, why do you have hope in Jesus Christ? And now maybe we can explain that. But the interesting thing is, when Peter wrote this, what did those people hear Peter say when this letter was read out loud to churches that were being persecuted, fairly young in the faith, and now he's saying, be prepared to give an answer for your hope. So today we would say, you need to know your Bible. Like, how could you ever give an answer for your hope if you don't know the Bible? I think that's great that you can know your Bible and you can give an answer for your hope based on Scripture. I'm not sure they could. First century church Bible hadn't been written, New Testament. Well, let me quote to you from the book of Matthew. And then Jesus said this in John. We'll flip over to Ephesians and we'll finish it up with Revelation. Right? So this is written like 60, kind of one of the earlier books in Peter. But, these letters, everybody didn't have a copy on their coffee table at home. Right? Even if some of the letters were already published, when I say published, I mean written, and maybe copied a few times, but again, you've got to realize they couldn't pull out their tablet and pull up, Bible.net and show you a bunch of scriptures and do word searches. So how did they do that? Well, they had to explain what they knew. That maybe they would explain it this way, that, Paul came in, he taught us the gospel. Who's Paul? Well, he's the guy who came in, he could do miracles. And, maybe you'd have to explain, so you give some credibility to who Paul was. Like, he was healing the sick, he was cleansing lepers, and he even raised some dead. I saw it with my own eyes. I was right there. Oh, okay, well, that sounds pretty powerful. What was Paul saying? Well, he said that Jesus rose from the dead. I've heard something about that somewhere. Some people are talking that way down in Jerusalem, that Jesus rose from the dead. What's that all about? Well, Jesus died on the cross. Really? What? So, you have to explain it, but basically you probably couldn't do it book, chapter, and verse. And I say today, thank God we can do that. I'm so thankful that we live in an age and a time where the Bible is accessible, and now even electronically, most of us have, maybe not most, some of us have figured out how we can even pull up that verse that we know it's in there somewhere, we just don't know where, and we can just do it on our phone. Well, there's the verse right there, because we know how to do the word search or something like that to find out concordance right away on your phone. That's cool, that's great. They just couldn't do that in the first century. So what do we need to do to be prepared for? And it kind of comes back to Titus, that we need to be able to teach. We need to know what the doctrine is. We need to hold on to sound doctrine. But a lot of these things, even in churches, that we debate over, that we divide over, that we have differences over, that we fuss over, those weren't the big deal in the first century church. Now, they had sometimes talked about, did the resurrection ever happen or not happen? Is Jesus coming back or is he not coming back? Can we live in this kind of sin or that kind of sin? So they did have some questions. They did even have false doctrine, right? But a lot of it had to do with the core essentials of Christianity. And again, I'm not saying that other things don't matter. They are important, but back then that was not their issue. Actually, when Peter wrote this, their issue was, are we even going to remain faithful to Christ or not? Because with this great persecution that's breaking out against the church, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I'm about to call it quits. I'm about to give up. I don't know if I want to be jailed again or tortured again or persecuted again. I don't know if I want this for my family. So some people, this is why Peter's writing, to encourage people to hold on, to remain faithful, to continue in their love for Christ, even in the face of persecution. So I just want to say that just so that people don't get discouraged when we talk about understanding the Bible and being able to explain the Bible or to teach the Bible, that you don't have to know everything. That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about we need to learn and we need to grow. We need to understand more. And that's, again, glad you're here tonight, for many of you a second time today, and then some people on Tuesday morning and Wednesday night. It's great that you are wanting to come and to learn more, to be encouraged, to be reminded again of some of the basic things over and over again. But the more we hear it, the more we can remember it, the more we can assimilate, and the more maybe we can put some more things together. Well, I knew that, and I knew this, but today's the first day I kind of figure out how they work together. Okay? So, good thing we can learn and grow, but I don't want anybody to go away discouraged or disappointed, saying, well, I just don't know as much as the next guy, and I don't have the answer to every question. So, 1 Peter is just encouraging us to grow in our faith and to be able to share that with others. So, back to Titus, though, Titus chapter 2. Now, we skipped ahead a few verses, because again, we're just focusing right now on what Paul is telling Titus to do. Okay? So now with Titus, he is to, in everything, Titus is to set an example to the church, to those people that he's trying to lead and to encourage and to teach, set an example. So again, that's interesting. He doesn't just say, make sure you just always teach the right things. He's saying you got to live the right way. Says the same thing really to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4. He says, watch your life and your doctrine closely. Not just your doctrine. So it's not just what you teach. You have to look at your life. How are you living? On the other hand, it's not just, well, I'm just going to live a good life, and I think people are going to be able to understand the doctrine of Christ just by witnessing my life. They don't really do that. Now, they may be impressed if they know that you are living a godly life. Now, and they may even come to you and ask you a question or two. But they're not just going to learn about Christ by seeing you live a moral life or a loving life or a life of service or humility, right? Does that make sense? It's kind of like God shows himself in Romans chapter 1. God shows himself by the creation, right? So Paul's writing, book of Romans, saying the people that reject God have no excuse because God has made himself evident to them through the creation of the world. Does that make sense so far? That's what he says. But nobody looks at the creation and says, boy, I see the stars, I see the world, I see the complexity of mankind, I see how it all fits together. There must be a great creator. His name must be Jehovah. And as I've looked up into the stars, I also realized that whoever it was that created the world, sent his son into the world, died on the cross, rose on the third day, and through my submission to him, I can be saved and live in heaven forevermore. Does anybody believe you can understand that and learn that just by looking at the creation? Or does the creation cause you to have an interest, a leaning, a desire to learn more and say, this just didn't happen by accident. Somebody created it. Who was the somebody? Let me start searching around, start looking. And God says, if you look for me, you will find me. God will provide a way that you can find him if you're looking. God is interested in sincere people that want to know the truth. And so God will lead you to what? To somebody that can actually tell you about God's plan of salvation through Jesus Christ, the grace and the price that was paid on the cross, and the resurrection, and the hope we have, right? That's where it comes. So it's kind of like the eunuch that was traveling from Jerusalem back home to Ethiopia, and he's reading the Bible. It seems like he's seeking. So God says, well, I'm going to send Philip over so that somebody can explain to this seeker what it's all about. Because I'm thinking the Ethiopian could have read the psalm over and over and over and over again, and still, I don't know who's this talking about. Who is this? What is this all about? That's what his confusion was. Is he talking about himself or somebody else? He needed someone to teach him. So that's the idea, not just by what we do, and not just by what we teach, but it's both. So when you're teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing to say bad about us. So again, if your life and your teaching is consistent, and if your teaching is accurate and it's truthful, and it's done in a way that makes sense, we try not to confuse people too much when we're teaching. Even complex issues and topics sometimes need to be made simple so people can understand. And then they can't accuse us and say, you're not living right. You're not doing what you say, or you're being hypocritical, or whatever their accusation is. We want to be able to present Christ without any barriers, at least on our part. If people reject the gospel, that's their decision. But if they reject the gospel because we are not very good witnesses, or we're not very good proclaimers or evangelists or teachers, we don't want to be standing in the way of somebody learning and coming to a knowledge of the truth. So back to the beginning of the chapter. So we've kind of found out what Titus is supposed to be doing. Now we're going to see what he's going to be encouraged to do. That Titus now is going to teach the older men. So he's going to teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith and in love and endurance. That's quite a job, isn't it? That kind of covers, to me, just about everything, So you teach the older men how they can, both by leading by example and by being able to teach what is truth, that if he teaches the older people, then they will be able to have an influence on the whole church. Because I'm not sure, I don't want to make a general statement today about our society, but back then, the older people were held up in honor. They were held up as wise people to be listened to, people to be respected. So he's saying, first of all, live a respectable life that people can truly respect you, not just because you're old, but also because you are living a model, an example. But if we can teach the older people, then they can have an influence and be able to teach the younger people. And again, if it indeed was a patriarchal society in Titus, not saying it was, but we know it was like that in the Old Testament, that the younger people, again, respected their own family members. So, your extended family, which would maybe even include, brothers and nieces and nephews and grandchildren, just, you have a lot of influence over your own family. So if you teach the older men these kinds of things, we're not going to go through them all, but I think we kind of have an idea of what this would look like, sound in the faith as well as these other areas of their character. So that's really important. So if you're familiar again with Titus chapter 1, goes through a long list of character qualities, and that has to do with people that are going to be elders. Elders in the church also have to have character qualities that we can look at, that we can honor, that we can respect, that they can be people that do not bring any kind of reproach on the church because of either their teaching or their lifestyle. But it's the same thing here. If you're an older person, Titus is called to teach them to live this kind of way, and then they can have an influence on others. Now we're going to get to the other section, which has to do with the women, because we're here, equal time, got to teach the men, but you also have to teach the women, because the women also have responsibility to teach. Likewise, teach the older women. So Titus is teaching them to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. So here his responsibility is to teach the older women, again, how they can be an example, how they can teach and influence the younger women. So here's the list of how they are to live and how they are to lead by their example. But the next section here, verse 4 and 5, talk about what their role would be, these older women. So again, the overall theme is teaching, and here it is with the older women. And again, older women, I'm not sure really if he's talking about age, certainly, because you think about whether it's men or women. So even a woman who's or a man who's a teenager, right? They can have a lot of influence over like kids that are in junior high. Because junior high kids are going through some stuff in their life, right? Because, junior high, it's just a little different than it is when you're in high school. But the high school girls could maybe say to the junior high girls, yeah, I know what it's like. I mean, there's a lot of peer pressure and a lot of this. And there's a lot of gossip stuff going on. There's a lot of, the conformity, and you want to keep up with everybody else. And so maybe the high school girls can say, I went through that when I was in junior high. And now I look back on it, it's really not that big of a deal. Yeah, some people may tease you because you're Christian. They may get all over you because maybe you're trying to live sexually pure, or maybe because you pray, or whatever it is. But we went through that, and I look back on it now, and it's really not as that big of a deal. I know you think it's a big deal right now, but I look back on it now, and does that make sense? So, because if there was nothing wrong with 85-year-old women, but if an 85-year-old woman told a girl in junior high that, they'd be like, well, they don't know what I'm doing. They didn't go through, that was, 135 years ago. Oh, you're in 85, I know. But, you don't get it. But, a girl maybe in her 20s can maybe teach a teen girl some things. Or then a woman who is been married for 10 years, she may be able to help a young woman that's just getting engaged. Help her with some things, some issues. I'm not talking about just helping with the wedding, but helping with stuff that you're thinking about and priorities and how God fits into all this and how you should live as an engaged woman, and then an early married woman, because how many people know that sometimes when you're first married, there's stuff that you go through even then. And so maybe an older woman, just even 10 years older, can say, listen, when you get married, it's not like the honeymoon is going to end one day, right? And it's not going to be as fun as it was on the honeymoon. And then what, right? So, but then the older women, maybe that have already had 3 or 4 kids, that maybe she's 50 now, she can help the younger women with kids. And then the older women that are, 60 or 70, does that make sense? Where people can actually help? So perhaps older does mean, you've got to be over 60, okay? Because in the Bible, I'm not sure what the age for, older men, older women, but it may have been, 50 or 60. That would be the point of, once you're older, that you're old. You guys are old. Just kidding. Anyway, but the older, sometimes it's just even maybe older in the faith. Because when somebody becomes a Christian, when they're 65 or 70 or 80, maybe they need somebody who's 40 to help them along in their faith, right? So they can learn and they can grow. So it could be older in the faith. It could be older in age, older in wisdom, older in life experience. But see how people have opportunity to teach? Okay, so, but these older women, however old they are, or if they're just spiritually more mature, they can urge the younger women. What are they going to do? Teach them how to what? Love their husbands and their children? Interesting, isn't it? I thought just love came naturally. I thought when I fell in love with my wife, that's all there was to it. But apparently you can learn to love. Does it say that right there? The older women are supposed to teach the younger women how to love. How do you love? How does this work out? What does that mean, how to love? I think we'd have to figure that out on our own to say, where do I need to grow in my loving attitude, in my loving service, in my loving words, in my loving sacrifice to love my spouse? But specifically here, he's just talking to the older women. That's a big responsibility. To be self-controlled. These younger women need to be self-controlled. They need to hear it, and they need to see it modeled by the older women. To be pure. To be busy at home. To be kind. To be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God. So does anybody here think now that, well, in the church, the women don't have any role or responsibility at all to teach or to encourage, or, they don't have a leadership? Well, they definitely do. They have a leadership role. No, you know what I'm not talking about, because, too often, and I said this morning, just pretend if you were here this morning, I'm saying this for the people that weren't here. Too often we think everything's got to be done here on Sunday within the 2 hours we're here. We've got 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, and that's it. There's very little leadership that's done here when we're together as the church, right? Because we all put on our Sunday best, even though it may not be our clothes, but certainly we come in and, we've got a smile and things are going well and, I'm feeling good, even though I'm not. And even though I don't feel like smiling, and my dress doesn't really match up with how I really feel, but we can all, kind of put on a facade a little bit, right? So a lot of teaching and learning and discipleship is done on a personal level, and a lot of times that has to do with what's going on during the week, not what's going on when we're together singing a song. Right? So that's how we grow. Not just being here is good. Maybe we would say it's a good start, but it really has to go beyond that. And that's what we're talking about here in Titus chapter 2. Verses 6 and 7. Similarly, encourage the young men. So we talked about the old man. Older man, the older woman. Young men. Young men, be self-controlled. In everything set them an example by doing what is good. So the young men, think about how you're living, how you're acting. People are watching. They're kind of trying to figure things out based on your actions, based on your words. So set an example. So they're to set an example for other believers. They're to set an example for people that aren't Christians. They're to set an example maybe for men that are even younger than they are. So they need to be self-controlled in the way they live. And maybe that just kind of overall fits with what the young men are supposed to be doing. And then verse 7 and 8, in your teaching show integrity and seriousness and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. So again, the challenge is, am I living such a life that even those people that are enemies of Christ or are very unkind to Christianity or looking for opportunity to accuse or to make it so that, Christianity doesn't mean anything, it can't be real, look at the way the people are living. Are we living our lives such a way that they have, a legitimate complaint against Christianity? Again, that doesn't mean we're going to live perfectly, but we need to be trying to live a godly life. Not always easy in an ungodly world. And maybe as the world becomes more ungodly, certainly the evidence of people that are living in the light as the world gets darker, or the people trying to live righteously as the world is becoming more unrighteous. Is that a fair statement? Would you say that our world generally is drifting further away from God, from truth, from morality, from doing what's right, from being somebody who is a servant or selfless or humble or truthful, right? Our world seems to be getting darker. So the darker it is, the brighter our light will shine so that people can see there is a difference between those who live for Christ and in Christ and those people who live in the world. So hopefully that's helpful for us when we think about this idea of teaching. that we all have an opportunity, maybe a little stronger than that. We all have a responsibility somehow of teaching by example, teaching by looking for opportunities where we can say something, maybe making ourselves available to people. Again, we can't teach people who do not want to be taught. But I know some Christians that sometimes would say to somebody, hey, if you ever want to get together and talk, if you ever want to have a Bible study, if you ever want to, share a little bit, let's get together. I'm available, right? So we just make ourselves available to others. Maybe older women make themselves, and you have to say that sometimes, because a younger woman will think, they're too busy, or maybe they're not going to understand, or, I just feel a little awkward. But if you talk to, and I know some of our women do that. And sometimes there's opportunities, maybe in a Bible class, to do that, to share, things from our life. And the same thing with the men, helping maybe young men who just got married, or young men that are starting a young family and they've got juggling a lot of stuff. And some people say, but I didn't do it right. How can I be an example? And how can I teach people? Because I made a lot of mistakes, when I was first married and when our kids were young. I was just so busy, running after my career and enjoying my hobby. And I was out just about every weekend and out in the evenings a lot. Well, that's a great way to teach somebody, to say, listen, when I was young, I made some poor choices. And I wasn't there as much as I should have been for my wife or my kids, And so sometimes that's more powerful than somebody says, yeah, I was the perfect husband, the perfect father, and, so why don't you just be like me? Does anybody really enjoy hearing those kinds of talks, as opposed to somebody saying, I did make a lot of mistakes. I just really encourage you, don't make those same mistakes I made, because I regret it now. I look back and I think, boy, I needed to spend more time with my family, or I needed to spend more time studying the Bible with my kids, or praying with my kids, or discipling my kids, or teach. Boy, when I grew up, I had a lot of fun with our kids. We just had a lot of fun. Just never got into the Bible or anything. I never taught them anything spiritually. But let me tell you, they were good at sports, and they weren't bad at school either. But spiritually, never invested in them. Right? So what kind of power would that be to somebody that is just young and getting started? They say, wow, because you're encouraging them, say, don't make the same mistake I made. So sometimes when we make mistakes, it's a teaching moment for us, and maybe a teaching moment for others as well, to say, we can, together, right, we can do better. So we're going to sing this song, but if we can encourage you in your Christian walk, if we can pray with you, or if somebody here wants to be baptized into Christ, we always make that an opportunity. So we're going to stand, we'll sing this song, and let us know how we can be an encouragement to you.